The senator from California.
Mr. President, I rise today with a number of my colleagues. I'll be beginning to speak for the next probably hour plus on the topic of election integrity and the seemingly constant attacks on our election integrity by Donald Trump and our Republican colleagues. I'm joined by a number of my friends and colleagues in our remarks here for the next block. Senator Welch will be speaking next, a colleague from Vermont, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Merkley, Leader Schumer, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Bennett, and we'll be wrapped up with my partner in organizing this group of senators, Senator Reid, not only the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, but ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee overseeing funding for this space. You know, I rise today with my colleagues out of grave concern for the future of our democracy. I currently serve as a ranking member of the Senate Rules and Administrations Committee. I also, as many of you know, am the former Secretary of State for the state of California. So I've seen firsthand, not just for the last 4 years, but for the last 8, 9 years, the growing threats to our democracy and the threats to the public confidence in our elections. Because sadly, the truth in the year 2025 is that it's not just foreign actors trying to undermine our elections and the people's confidence in the elections. It's also so many Republican officials here at home, not just in the Capitol, in state houses across America, but yes, even here in the Capitol. You know, I used to think of the old horror movie where the person on the phone would say, "The call is coming from inside the House." In state legislatures, in the Capitol, in the Oval Office, radical Republicans are working hard, actively working hard to make it harder for eligible Americans to exercise their constitutional right to vote. We see it in the endless lies and conspiracy theories about massive voter fraud. We see it in the new barriers being erected that would make it harder for eligible Americans to simply register to vote. And we see it in the Trump administration's firing of the hard-working and dedicated security officials who are tasked with protecting our elections. So yes, over the next hour with my Democratic colleagues, we will peel back the curtain on the tactics being used to undermine our federal elections because our fundamental democracy is at stake. In Rochester Hills, Michigan, Republican clerk Tina Barton worked hard to help administer and uphold a free and fair election in 2020. But for her dedication and hard work and professionalism, 1 week after the 2020 election, Tina received an anonymous phone call. Not a phone call thanking her for her service, but a phone call threatening her life. The voice on the other end threatened to come after her family, to hold a knife to her throat, and to kill her. For as shocking as threats like that may be, Tina represents just the one in every 3 election workers who has reported receiving threats, harassment, and abuse. So for Tina and so many others, that harassment grew worse with every lie spread by the Trump campaign about a so-called stolen election, with threats against elections officials continuing in subsequent elections. There was no stolen elections. That's a farce. But for those selfless election workers, Donald Trump hasn't even tried to lower the temperature of political rhetoric or combat the disinformation that leads to the threats and harassment. Instead, he's actually actively made it worse for those administering elections. Think of the election workers and all the volunteers who work polling places to help our elections and our democracy thrive. He's made it worse for voters. He's fired federal workers who combat election misinformation and disinformation. Why would he and his administration and Republicans in Congress who support him want to make it easier for people to interfere with our elections? I'm lost. I'm at a loss for an answer. What I do know is that by failing to counter, by failing to elevate the truth, Republicans in Congress have become complicit as they just sit back instead of pushing back. You know, believe it or not, there was a time not that long ago when even Republicans had the moral courage to speak out against Trump's attacks on our democracy. I do think back a few years to my days as California Secretary of State, when during the first Trump administration, he created a commission to investigate these unfounded claims of quote-unquote voter fraud without evidence, baseless claims, but for him, important enough to set up a commission to investigate and uncover the truth. The commission set out to collect sensitive, private voter information from every state, demanding that states hand over not just the name of every voter on the voter rolls, but their date of birth, their voting history, their social security information, and more. It was a blatant power grab, long before Elon Musk started tapping into federal servers, by the way. It was a blatant power grab, which was responded to. 44 states, both Republican and Democratic, said no. Republican and Democratic elections officials throughout the country joined together to reject Donald Trump's demands under the first term. Even in Mississippi, hardly a woke Democratic bastion, folks, even in Mississippi, then Secretary of State and now Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, a Republican, was outraged. He was so offended by the power grab that he responded to the White House's request with, quote, "Go jump in the Gulf of Mexico," saying, quote, "Mississippi is a great state to launch from." Good for him. So you can imagine my disappointment when, fast forward to this past March, Trump announced yet another anti-voter executive order that would empower DOJ to access sensitive voter data. Very reminiscent, but the request from that first term now on steroids. And what does so many of our Republican colleagues here in the Senate and in the House of Representatives say? Nothing. But it's not just that Republicans have gone silent. They've actually become Trump's enablers here in Congress by foregoing their responsibility to serve as a check and balance on the executive branch. Now, any day now here in the Senate, we could see Republicans take up the SAVE Act, a measure that recently passed the House of Representatives, a bill that I should say scapegoats immigrants simply to justify new barriers to voter registration. And not only is that wrong, it's un-American. And again, it's based on a lie. Now, I bring to this body my 6 years of experience administering elections, not just in any state, but the most populous state in the nation, with the largest number and the most diverse number of voters in the nation. I understand the complexities of both keeping our elections free and fair, but also secure. And happy to take time meeting with any of you to walk you through the security measures that are in place to ensure the integrity of our elections. And I can tell you this, in case you didn't know already, it's already a crime for non-citizens to vote in our elections. To propose it as a new law is misleading. It's already against the law. And by the way, it's also extremely, extremely rare. But if our Republican colleagues were to have their way, American citizens will feel the impacts of the SAVE Act. From the active duty service member who has to move for a new deployment and has to work so much harder than they should have to update their registration with the new address at the local elections office, who could be hours and hours from the base where they're assigned. Think of a married woman who chose to change her last name when she got married, and now the birth certificate, name listed on the birth certificate and the name on their ID no longer match, and have some explaining to do and hurdles to jump over simply to register to vote. Just two small examples that impact millions and millions of Americans should the SAVE Act pass. And if you make it harder to register, guess what? You've made it harder for eligible citizens to vote. That would be the result of the SAVE Act. Now, here in the Senate, I want people to know that together with my Senate Democratic colleagues, I'll do whatever it takes to kill this bill, to stop it from passing, to keep it even from coming up if we can. Because we owe it to our constituents to fight every executive order that undermines our democracy, and to keep demanding answers on the firing of federal workers entrusted with safeguarding our elections. So over the course of the next hour, Senate Democrats will lay down a marker. We will stand strong against a rising tide of attacks on our democracy. And I'll keep leading the fight to stop this cynical and dangerous bill, and to stop Trump and Republican attempts to undermine our voting rights. Mr. President, I thank you, and I yield the floor to my next colleague.